Good morning, guys. Thank you very much for being with us. It's great again to have Gavin with us for number 3 of Fix a Photo. Straight over to you, Gavin.
Thank you very much. Yep. Good morning, everybody, and welcome along to this Fix a Photo webinar live. Very much thanks to the image file. I do like to point out the fact this is a completely live webinar. Anything can happen in the next 30 minutes or so. So today we've got a little mixed bag of photographs to run through, and we've had a few pictures sent in and a few questions sent in. So we've got some nice little things to show you, and we're going to work inside of Photoshop, and we're actually going to do a little bit of work in Photoshop Elements at the end as well. Now, as always, this is an interactive webinar, so if you have any questions, please fill them in. There's a little box somewhere, and James is at the other end collating all the questions, and he'll fire some of the questions at me at the end or as we go through if they're relevant. Obviously, if you're watching the recording of this, sadly, you missed your chance to ask any questions live, but join me again in 2 weeks and you can ask them live. Okay, so let's get cracking. Let's close that down, and we'll get on with some photography and some Photoshop. Now, I'm using the very newest version of Photoshop today because that seemed like a really good idea right up until it goes wrong. But we'll see. So we're actually in the brand new version of Photoshop. Not that that's going to make any difference for the photography. I thought I'd point that out if you see a few things that are slightly different to what you're used to. Okay, so question number 1. All of these, of course, come in totally anonymous. I've no idea who the pictures belong to, and that's the way I like to keep it. So question number 1, we had this picture sent in here, and it says this picture was taken at a bird of prey center. Now, is it possible to crop the owl so it's a 24 by 16 print? And is it possible to add some more dramatic lighting? I think the word used was cinematic lighting. And finally, is it possible to do a 3D effect so the owl is coming out of the photo? There were a couple of other things on there as well. So the photographer sent me quite a substantial list of questions, which is great. That's fine. Sadly, this is only a short webinar, so I can only cover a few of them, but I'll do my best. The 3D bit we're actually going to cover right at the end because it was asked on another question as well. So I'll try and do the cropping bit and the more dramatic lighting bit. Right, let's get going. Now, I've been sent the raw file, which is always the way I like to work whenever possible. And as we can see, we've got a great shot. This is obviously exactly as it came off the camera. And the photographer has done a brilliant job to capture the owl in motion and slap bang in the middle of the frame, because these things can really move. And if you're using a longish lens, then getting it slap bang in the middle isn't as easy as you might imagine. We've got plenty of space around the outside, and that's usually a good thing with this sort of photography. Trying to fill the frame and get the cropping right for wildlife photography on moving subjects, much more difficult than it is on a static subject. So the first thing we're going to do is crop it. But we're not just going to crop the picture. We're going to crop to a specific size. Remember, the photographer asked for a 24 by 16. Now, if I come to my crop tool here, you'll find there are a bunch of preset crop sizes, but you won't find anything that says 24 by 16. Now, you can put that in. There is a custom button down the bottom, and you can type in 24 by 16, and that will give you a crop in the proportions of 24 to 16. Okay, so you can do that if you want to. However, there are a couple of other ways you can do this as well. You could just do the maths and say, well, 24 by 16, that would be what? A 12 by 8, that would be a 6 by 4, or a 2 by 3. So they are all the same proportions. Because in RAW, when you crop, you're not cropping to a pixel size, you're cropping to a ratio. So it's in the ratio of 24:16, which is the same ratio as 2 by 3. Well, that's a lot of mathematics for 9:30 in the morning. I apologize about that, but that's kind of how it works. So that's a 16:24 crop. Press enter, and that crops my image down. Okay, so we've cropped the image. Next thing to do is to try and sort out the lighting. Now, it's worth remembering, with the really wide shot that we had, the camera made a few adjustments to its metering and its white balance based on that wide shot. When you zoom in or you crop in, it's not unusual to find that you have to make some changes because the camera now isn't seeing all of that other stuff around the outside that can throw the exposure and throw the white balance. So you'll need to re-meter and re-white balance. Now, we can't do that in camera because, of course, we've taken the picture. So we'll need to do that in computer. So let's start with the white balance first of all. The white balance to my eye looks very slightly cold. It's just not quite right. So let's change the white balance to cloudy. No, that's way too warm. Daylight, that's probably close. I reckon if I just drop the temperature down a little bit, then that's going to be a little bit closer to what I wanted. So changing the white balance, not unusual when you have to crop. And similarly, changing the exposure is a little bit common as well. So there's a couple of ways we could do this. There's a great big auto button here. Now, I love auto buttons. Whenever I see auto in Photoshop, I'll click it just to see if it makes it better. Let's face it, you've got absolutely nothing to lose. So I'll hit the auto button, and it does an auto correction. But that's not good, is it? That's terrible. That's not what we want at all. So I'm going to hit the default button, and we'll go back and do it ourselves. Now, I reckon we're probably just a little bit underexposed, so we'll bring the exposure up. Remember, the camera would have exposed for the entire scene, not just this close crop. And I reckon we can bring back some shadow detail if we open up the shadows, and we'll bring back some highlight detail as well. Now, the photographer here has asked me for dramatic lighting or cinematic lighting. They haven't asked me to keep this completely real, as you might want to if this was a pure natural history shot. You may not want to go too far with the adjustments. But in this case, I think I've got a little bit more free rein. That means I'm going to put some clarity. Basically, what I'm building up to an excuse where I can put clarity on the picture. That's what it's boiling down to. So clarity just puts a little bit of contrast into the scene and a little bit of sharpness and bite. Can we go further with our cinematic lighting? Well, yes and no. The thing about cinematic lighting is it's designed, it's made, it's planned. What we've got here is natural lighting. And although we can do some tweaks and adjustments, you can't get super dramatic lighting if it wasn't there in the first place. You either need to be really lucky with the weather or plan it, light it, and set it up. But let's see the best I can do. So I'm going to come up to the graduated filter here. And with the graduated filter, I can make some adjustments to various things. You'll notice the panel on the right-hand side is now changed. I can change maybe the exposure down 3/4 of a stop or thereabouts. And we can just drag out a little bit of shadow onto the side of the picture. Okay, so we're just going to darken down that side, and you can see I could lighten it as well to change the effect. So we're getting a little bit more dramatic lighting there. We can add another one of these gradients in, maybe just across the top, just to darken that patch down too. And that helps to make this more dramatic and make it stand out a little bit clearer. So we are starting to get a more dramatic lighting. Let's just start where we started. That's what I had coming in, and that's my adjustments so far. So we're getting closer to what I want, but the green in the background is maybe just a little bit too punchy. It's a little bit too vibrant. We need just to dull that green down slightly. Now, there are many ways you could do this, but I'm going to go with a way that works in RAW. And I'm going to jump over to the HSL stroke grayscale. Now, the HSL stroke grayscale. HSL stands for hue, saturation, and luminance. Okay, and it's the saturation I'm interested in. So I'll work on the saturation tab. Now, what it allows me to do is to change the saturation of certain colors in the picture. For example, these yellow buttercups are annoying me. I don't know why. I like buttercups, but in this picture they are annoying me. And I could target just the yellows and make the yellows disappear. And that works quite well, but you will see it also changes the color of the owl, because the owl is a bit yellow as well. So we won't do the yellows. We'll go with the greens. And although the grass is really quite yellow, because grass normally is, there's still a bit of green in there. And by reducing the greens, I'm making them just dull down so they're not as punchy and they're not as vibrant in the scene. We can do the same but in the opposite direction. So we can make the color of the owl pop up and make that pop off the image somehow. By increasing the oranges, because it's a kind of a yellowy orange, the owl becomes a much more vibrant color. And we'll put a bit of yellows in there too. And you can see how that just balancing up gives us quite a nice kind of balance between the color of the greens and the oranges. And if I flick that on and off, yeah, I mean, that makes a massive difference. Again, wildlife photographers will turn in their grave if you want a pure wildlife shot. This is getting into the realms of pictorial, but that's where I feel we're heading with the description and the requirements. Okay, so that's pretty much everything I can do here in RAW. Let's click on the Open Image button. We'll exit out of RAW, and we'll just do a couple of quick things here in Photoshop. I'll grab myself the spot healing tool. I can just go around and fix all these little yellow buttercups with the spot healing tool. It's a little bit like getting rid of dust spots, really. Yeah, you get the idea. I could go around and do all of those, time permitting, but time is the one thing we are always short of when we're doing the webinars for the image file. There we go. That looks pretty good. That's not bad. And the last thing, of course, was the size. Remember, the photographer specifically asked for a 24:16 print. I mean, I'm not going to give them a 24:16 print, but I'll let them do that themselves. But if I can size this to a 24:16, at the moment it's in the ratio of 24:16, but it's not ready to print at 24 inches by 16 inches. Now, once again, there are plenty of ways you could do this. Here's how I do it. I'm going to get the crop tool, and on the crop tool, well, let's see, I've been cheating here, so let's see if we can just reset that. There we go. On the crop tool, there are a bunch of presets here. This time, the 2x3, 6x4, 12x8, 16x24, I think that's right, won't work, because that'll actually shrink my image down in size, because now it's not proportions of, it's exact sizes of. I've chosen the width, height, and resolution option, and that will allow me to type in a width of 24 IN for inches, 16 IN for inches at 300 pixels per inch. You might want to go 240 or whatever your usual size is. When I click on the tick, it'll resize my image up so the picture gets larger. I've had to increase it, and that will be exactly the right size for a print. Image size, change it to inches, 24:16 at 300 pixels per inch. It's made a whopping nearly 200 megabyte file size. So it's surprising. It's a decent picture coming in, so it will take that upscaling just fine. So there we go. Hopefully that gives the photographer something to go for. I'm sorry I couldn't answer everything that you had on your question there, but fingers crossed that gives us a good direction. Okay, so let's do something completely different. Let's go grab a different image completely. This is the new nag screen in Photoshop. That's going to annoy me. We'll have to switch that off, I'm sure. Somewhere in the preferences I can. Okay, so next question was, I was on one of your workshops. Oh, you're on one of my workshops. Okay, and you loaned me your fisheye lens. Can I remove the bowing? Yes, the kind of thing I do on my workshops. I will often lend people, if they're a Canon user, not so easy if you're a Nikon user, but I'll loan you my Canon fisheye lens, and just to experience different lenses. It's always a great thing. That's what I like about photography, is photographers lending each other things and going, well, have a look through this lens and see how that changes your perception of the scene. This is a shot with my fisheye. Yes, I remember being there. I think that was Wells Cathedral. And it's definitely bowed. That's kind of the idea of the bowing. How can I get rid of the bowing? Well, there is a way you can do it here in RAW, but before I show you, let me show you the theory of what should happen, because there is a minor hiccup to this otherwise brilliant plan. What should happen, if I open this RAW file here and I go to the Lens Correction tab. On the Lens Correction tab there's a button that says Profile, and on the Profile there is an actual button that says Enable Lens Profile Corrections. When you click on that, it'll remove any distortion that's associated with that lens. So what's happened is Adobe have gone through and they've analyzed lens distortion for thousands of lenses, well, maybe hundreds, perhaps that's an exaggeration, and they've programmed them into Photoshop and into Lightroom so that you can instantly remove the pincushion or barrel distortion. Have a look up in this top left corner where it says PABS. If I turn it off, you'll see that there is a bowing and a straightening as I turn it back on, and also a removal of vignetting, that darkening at the edges. So that's what's supposed to happen, and you can see it's read the EXIF information. It knows I shot with a Sigma 10 to 20 millimeter lens and has applied the correct distortion removal. Brilliant. So you might think that the plan is really simple, because I did. Open up this image, jump across to the lens correction, go to the profile, enable lens correction, and nothing happens. Damn. Sometimes that does happen. Sometimes the EXIF information isn't there for one reason or another, and it just doesn't work. When that happens, you need to do it manually. So you need to go to the make, which was a Canon, the model, which was a Canon. If you look up here, it's an 8 to 15 millimeter lens. It says it at the top. So that would be the smallest one, 8 to 15 millimeter. oh, wait a minute, it only goes up to 14 millimeters. So annoyingly, Adobe hasn't made a profile for this lens to correct the distortion. And your next port of call then is going to be good old Google. Go to Google. Google lens correction, camera raw, 8 to 15 millimeter Canon, and guess what? I'll save you the trouble, there won't be one. Well, there is one, actually, that's not true. There is one, but it's for a crop sensor lens. And this picture was taken with a full frame sensor camera. Bottom line is, there is no correction for this distortion. So, have I made a disaster? Is this not going to work? Do I not have a solution? No, of course I do. Of course I do. Where would be the fun if I didn't have a workaround? So here's the workaround. Now, it's a fisheye lens. Canon are not the only company that make fisheye lenses. There are others. For example, you can get yourself a Tokina. Get yourself a Tokina and go for the 10 to 17 millimeter fisheye. That sounds like an 8 to 15. That sounds close. And that will help correct the distortion. And that's better. That's, you know, a lot less bowed than it was before. But it's not quite right. There's still bowing in there. Okay, well, let's try another one. I know that Sigma make a fisheye lens. Sigma make a 15 millimeter fisheye lens. Now this is good because if you look at the top, this was shot with a 15 millimeter fisheye lens. Cross your fingers. Hey, that's more like it. So that's much better. That's corrected the distortion of the fisheye and straightened up those edges. Now it doesn't straighten up the falling over verticals because that's not an optical flaw. That is the angle of the camera. But we can come into the manual setting here and we can use the settings manually just to straighten everything up, something like that. It squashed it together a little bit tight for me as well, so I'd want to go and straighten something up like that. And maybe with a little bit of cropping, we might want to just sort of crop in. Now, of course, I should say, if you do use the custom cropping options, do remember to reset them to normal for future use once you've done your 1624. So something like that, we can just go crop in and center up. Okay. And there you go. So that's corrected the distortion as best I can here in RAW. It's worth noting, however, the edges are going to be soft because we've pulled them 1.5 miles out to try and get them straight and upright. It's not going to be as sharp as if you'd done a multi-image panorama, which is what I was suggesting to you at the time, if it's the person I think it is. But that is a lot better for your request. Having said all of that, you know what? I actually prefer it as it was shot. My personal preference is that. I like that, but you can do that if you prefer. Okay, that's the great thing about photography. No rights, no wrongs. You choose whatever you feel is right and you stick to it. Okay, time's moving on, so let's move on as well. We have a little picture here. What's next? Oh, come on, let's have some R's. I can almost hear the R's, almost. The question says, after a testing photo session, this was one of the best pictures I got. Yeah, I know those photo sessions. Shooting with children, it can test your patience, and some of them can be brilliant. And I can remember doing photo shoots where I had maybe 3 pictures before, frankly, that was the end of the session. Yeah, been there, done that. Okay, so can the wand be removed, or are there anything, can't get my teeth in, or is there anything else you can suggest to improve the picture? Okay, can the wand be removed? Yeah, probably some of the wand can. Anything over the finger is going to be really hard, and we're going to deal with that. Removing the wand would be easier and probably better inside of Photoshop, but if you have Lightroom since Lightroom 5, or Photoshop since CC, then there's actually a half-decent removal tool here inside of RAW and inside of Lightroom. The spot removal has been massively improved over the years, and now I don't have to have a single spot. Now I can actually drag a whole shape just by painting and crossing my fingers, and yeah, that's pretty good, and that does a reasonable removal. It's not perfect, but it's reasonable. We've kind of got a little bit there. We can just go and remove. And maybe we'll just do a little bit down here too. Yeah, we don't want a bit of the, why does it do that? We don't want a bit of the hair, we want a little bit, something like that. It's not fantastic. In fact, sometimes you get this kind of fuzzy, blurry stuff where you're trying to go from light to dark. This is sort of a little bonus tip. If that happens, don't heal it, clone it. And once you've cloned it, well, what you'll get is a pretty obvious edge. But once you've cloned it, go back to your spot removal tool, switch to healing, and then just heal over that part that you cloned. So you're doing it twice, but that helps to remove that fuzzy bit and give you a nice, neat edge. It's not perfect, but it'll do for time, because time's not on my side. Okay, so yeah, I can kind of remove the wand, but now I'm going to need to crop the picture, and I reckon the crop you wanted was really was going to be a nice tight crop anyway. I reckon that's kind of the shot is going to be in here somewhere, something like that. We'll go for a more sort of letterboxy shot, something like that. There you go. To get in really close and intimate with your subject is often the way to go. Now, if you're going to do this, you have to make sure that your picture is sharp. And it is taken with a Canon 40D. I remember those. So it's not one of these super modern cameras, but you know what? That is sharp. There's some little bits and pieces you can clean up inside of Photoshop, but the eyelashes are pin sharp, and that's always what I'm looking for. When I'm looking at portraits. Are the eyelashes sharp? Is the iris clear? Can I make out the iris pattern? That's, you can say what you like about modern cameras, but that is a good shot with a bit of a classic camera. So we could stop there, but there's a couple of other things I reckon we can do to improve this further. White balance looks a little bit out to me. There's no grey card with this, so I can't get a correct meter reading. But what we can sometimes do is use the white of the eye, especially on young children. They have nice whites. So we can often use that as my white balance. That's probably closer to the truth, but I reckon this picture would be more suitable as a black and white. I'm thinking black and white. Okay, so I'd normally come in and sort of take away the clarity just to give everything a nice smoothness, but I still think black and white. Now, there's a quick and dirty way of going black and white in Photoshop RAW. In Lightroom, you just hit the black and white button. In Photoshop RAW, you would just take away the saturation and kick up the contrast. But there is a better way. That's a little bit kind of rough and ready, and there's one easier way for getting better results, especially when your subject has such great skin. Very simply, I'm going to go to the HSL grayscale. Yep, right back where we started with the owl picture, same tool, but this time I'm going to use it in a different way. I'm going to click on the Convert to Grayscale button. Everything goes black and white, we lose all of the detail, and now all I need to do is increase the yellows in the picture. The oranges in the picture. The oranges are the skin tones, and as you see, if I move them left and right, I can change the brightness of the skin tones, and obviously I need to increase them, and that just gives a beautiful glow and softness to the skin. It works with some people, it doesn't work with everybody, of course, but when it works absolutely beautifully. I think that's just the nicest way to go. It gives a very, very powerful eye-catching shot. You can maybe pull down the contrast a little bit and maybe just tweak the whites and the blacks, but really, if I was the parent of that child, I'd be buying that picture. I'd be buying it as a 24:16 print, printing it myself and putting it on my wall super giant, because it's a gorgeous, gorgeous little shot. So although you may have come away from that session feeling that that was a disaster and I only nailed 3 pictures, you only need 1 great shot. Of course, unless you're doing this for a living, in which case you need about a dozen great shots and you need them to buy them, but that's a whole other story, and that's where the image file can definitely come to your aid with a great gallery. Okay, so let's close that down. We've got one more to do, and we've got just a few minutes to do it. So what have we got left? Sports photos. Brilliant. So last one, and the question says, I've seen some photos where the object appears to be floating off the page. How is it done? Okay, and this also refers back to the earlier question we had at the beginning. Objects floating off the page. Now, I'm going to assume that the photographer meant the out-of-bounds effect, where something appears to be floating off of a page on screen. So this isn't necessarily something you make a print of, but if it's in your gallery, it can be really eye-catching. So I've got a picture here. I've only been sent a JPEG, but that's actually fine. If you are sending in your pictures, RAW is always preferable, but JPEG is okay. I'm actually going to do this not inside of Photoshop. I'm going to do this inside of Photoshop Elements. Now, Photoshop Elements, if you've never discovered Elements before, it's the slimmed down budget version of Photoshop. If you have Lightroom, you want Photoshop Elements. Unless, of course, you're in the photography package where you have Lightroom and Photoshop, that's fine. Even if you have that, once you've seen this, you might still want to grab yourself a copy of Elements, because it has some little built-in features that I wish, please, put them in Photoshop. And one of them is creating out-of-bounds effects. So we'll bring an image in, here we go, and Elements is very, very similar to Photoshop. It has all of the main tools that you need, but it has a couple of options. There's a quick button, which I tend not to use, but the guided button. Now, I really love this guided button. It takes you through, step by step, some things that you might want to do, from the real basic stuff to, you know, brightness and contrast and cropping and lightening and darkening, down to some kind of effects that you might want to apply, and then some things that are considered fun. And we forget about fun as photographers. We're terrible, aren't we? We get sucked into everything must be serious. No, photography should be fun. If you're having fun, you're going to be better at your photography, trust me. So we're going to go with the out-of-bounds effect. Now, to do the out-of-bounds effect, I have to read and follow instructions. That's not easy for me, I'll be honest with you. I'm not really an instruction kind of guy. When I get a new piece of equipment, if there's an instruction book, that goes in the bin. If there's a quick start guide, I might look at it. Okay, but yeah, this is a bit like a quick start guide. It's not too long, but there's not many pictures. There is one picture, just to get an idea of where we're heading. Okay, so number one, add frame. And you do it by clicking the big add frame button. Okay, so click that, you add the frame. 1A, move the frame by dragging the handles. Okay, so what you're doing here is you're making the piece of paper that your object will float off of. Okay, so we're just going to make a little kind of bit of paper, something like that. That's going to be our main paper, and then the biker will look like he's floating off the top of it. That's the idea. Okay, 1B, position the frame, so I've positioned it already. 1C, skew the frame by holding Control, Alt, and Shift, and dragging the corner handles. Okay, Control, Alt, and Shift. Now that's a 3-finger keyboard shortcut, which is tricky to do when you're trying to do a live webinar as well, but I'm doing my best. There we go. And that gives it that kind of perspective feel, which is kind of what we're after. Yeah, that's okay. When you're happy, click the green tick. Okay. What next? Adjust the width of the frame by dragging the handles. Okay, dragging the handles. Oh yeah, okay, so it's going to add a little frame around the outside, and we can just adjust that just to make it look like there's a piece of paper that's floating on. Okay, happy with that. Make it a little bit bigger at the front. Okay, and then click on the tick. Right, okay, so you can see this is starting to come together. That's not too bad. What next? Selection tool. Okay, we'll click on the selection tool button. Now that will give me the selection tool. I can zoom in a little bit here, and we're going to select everything that extends beyond the frame, apparently, according to the instructions. Now this is where time pays off enormously. Guess what I'm short of again? Yep, time. Okay, so let's just go back through and do this as quick as I can. Okay, so the neater you can make your selection, the better it's going to look. And this is, why didn't the photographer send me a nice square-edged thing? Why with all some, yeah, thank you very much, lots of edges and bits. Okay, round we go. We'll try and get a bit of that as well. We may miss a few bits just for the purposes of speed and demonstration. Actually, I can't. I'm going to get annoyed. If I miss something, it will annoy me and bug me. So let's try and get everything I can. Okay, see, I nearly missed his shoulder. It's worth having a good close look. Have you missed anything? There's a bit in the middle I haven't taken out because that's actually background. Yeah, there we go. That looks pretty good. You can fine-tune this after the event, but it's much, much easier to nail it at the time when you're making the effect. Okay. Okay, I really must stop. One thing I must say is when you're doing your selection, make sure you come inside of the frame. Okay, that's important, and it's something that often you forget, but it's really important to make sure you come down and inside of the frame. Okay, so we've done that. What next? That's it. Press the out of bounds effect button, and it does the cutout and makes the out of bounds effect. We can stylize it. We can add a gradient in the background. Click OK, gradient in the background. You can choose from any of the gradients that's supplied. Go with the default one. It kind of looks best. And there is the out of bounds effect. That's pretty good. Now we can just fine-tune it and finesse it a little bit more if we jump back into the expert option, which is the worst name they could have possibly chosen for that. It used to be called full because you had all of the full toys, but who considered themselves an expert? Yeah, difficult one. Back into the expert mode, we can just get the crop tool and maybe we'll re-crop this image. Something like that. We'll drag out a little crop. Yeah, drag out the edges just to recompose it, perhaps a little bit more at the top so it's not quite so tight. Yeah, there you go. And there is, very, very quickly, an out-of-bounds effect. So have a look at the layers. On the layers you can see all of these layers that were created by the guided steps. I didn't create any of those. That's what all of those steps did for me. If you want to do this in Photoshop, all you need to do is recreate all of those steps on the right-hand side. The question is, how do you do that in Photoshop? Well, that's probably a question for another webinar because sadly we've come to the end of this one. So there we are. That answers 4 questions from today. If you've got one of your own pictures that you'd like to see adjusted, changed, improved, altered, feel free to send them along and I'll be happy to do it again in 2 weeks' time.
Gavin, thank you very much. I do have a couple of questions. I know we're very short of time, so let me first of all say, yes, if you do have pictures that you want to send in, email it to fixaphoto, all as one word, fixaphoto@theimagefile.com, and we'll handle it from there. While we're on this picture, Gavin, let me just ask the one query that came in on this. On the outer bounds, can you add a picture in the background, or does it have to be a graduation?
No, you can add anything you like. Once you come out of it, then this is yours to play with as you wish. The graduation is just a layer, so you could drop another layer in behind, and you know, you can go nuts. Use the tools as a starting point, and then build the effect up from there.
Excellent. I also had one that came through, which I don't think we've actually got an image to go through this on. So Terry, if you send in an image, then we can certainly try and answer that to do with removing lens flare. Send us an image, Terry, and we'll get it in on a future webinar. The first one, the owl landing, flying. Oh, sorry, I've got one before that. Is the orange in black and white like making it an infrared image? Do you remember with the baby?
Yep,
you added the orange saturation in the black and white, and it did make it look a bit infrared, I thought.
Yeah, it's a similar idea to infrared. Infrared would be a little bit different in the tone of colors you'd choose, but it is a similar idea. You're taking a single tone of color and then increasing them. So yeah, infrared you tend to get dark blues and glowing sort of greens. So it tends to be a slightly different range of colors that you would adjust here, but the basic principle very, very similar.
Perfect. And the final questions are to do with the owl. First of all, we can't really give one-to-one on this sort of thing. Some of it will, I mean, it has to be for the benefit of everyone. So if your question is really just for your own benefit, it's not really going to get handled in a webinar. But the main thing was, with using a 500mm lens, the subject gets compressed into the background, and is there a way that you can sort of bring that subject forward so it's sort of giving more of a 3D effect? It's not looking so compressed by the length of the telephoto lens. Wasn't really looking at the out of bounds effect. It was just really to make it pull out from the background.
Okay, so short answer to that one is not really, no. I mean, the lens you take is going to change the optics of the picture, and although you could cut out the background and add a new one in, it's never going to feel the same as if you do it in camera. So if you get a chance to do this again, get yourself set with a very small tripod, wide-angle lens. I've done this before. You pop it just in front of the guy who's got the glove on, and you can get some pretty dramatic pictures. But it'll change not only the background, but also the shape and feel of the subject as well. So short answer is no. Long answer is yeah, but you'll need to go back and do it again.
Perfect. Gavin, thank you very much. Guys, I hope you found it useful. Remember, send in your pictures, fixaphoto@theimagefile.com. We'll handle it from there. 2 weeks' time. Next one, 2 weeks, on Wednesday morning, 9:30 as normal. Thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you very much, everybody, and I'll see you again in 2 weeks' time.